Let's talk about cognitive psychology. Now, this came about partly in a reaction to behaviorism. The behavioral school has been a very successful and productive theory and is able to predict many aspects of human behavior and also to come up with interventions. But there is something missing because we have a subjective impression that there are internal processes that we think, we reason, we process information. So the cognitive psychologists said, well, we need a theory that recognizes this, that instead of just considering observables like behaviorism does, let's consider internal processes. So, in a way, cognitive theory, which evolved in the 60s, it's not coincidental that also computer technology was evolving in the 60s. And cognitive psychology, in a way, looks at the human mind as a computer. So you're looking at the way it stores information and processes information. Now, some of the domains in cognitive psychology include memory, attention, concentration, perception, and language. For instance, if you've ever seen an optical illusion, that tells you something about the way that the mind perceives. It's not as straightforward as you would think. You can also study attention. Is it really possible to double task? Probably not. You're able to focus pretty much on one thing at a time. Memory, you can look at short-term memory and long-term memory. You can look at processes and cues that enhance memory, that are needed for memory. So all of these aspects of mental processes are under the domain of cognitive psychology. Now, a very productive application of cognitive psychology has been cognitive behavioral theory. Now, cognitive behavioral theory and therapy are a very effective way to address many psychological problems. In particular, anxiety and depression respond well to cognitive behavioral therapy. And the basic concept behind it is that your thoughts generate your mood, generate psychological problems, and by altering your thoughts, you can improve your mood. It's most commonly used with depression. So an example of distortions that you get, cognitive distortions that you get when you're depressed, would include things like overgeneralization. You get a low grade on one test, you overgeneralize and say, I'm not a good student, I probably should drop out of school, this is all pointless. Well, that's a sort of distortion you get when you're depressed, and if you specifically address that distortion and say, well, wait a minute, I've gotten bad grades before, I've recovered, maybe I need to study a little harder, but this doesn't mean that it's pointless for me to go to school. That's an overgeneralization. That doesn't make sense. Some other cognitive distortions, catastrophizing, where you take an instance and you think of the worst case scenario and that becomes your reality. Again, a cognitive behavioral therapist would say, well, challenge that idea. Is that really accurate? Is your catastrophizing really an accurate depiction of reality? And generally it isn't. Shoulds. Albert Ellis was a famous cognitive behavioral therapist, and he would talk about shoulding on yourself. To use shoulds by saying, I should do this, or other people should do this, you become distressed because you get rigid ideas of what should happen, and that can lead to depression and anxiety. So cognitive behavioral therapy, an answer to behaviorism, not necessarily a better theory or a worse theory, just a theory that applies better in some instances, and it led to the very successful school of therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy.